Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Friday, June 20th, 2025, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research 2 channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. Alright guys, well I think you're going to find this video very interesting because I'm going to cover this article from a very recent article, very recent article from Poopular Science. Just missing an O here. But in any case, I get these things in my feed, and honestly, I was extremely interested in these ruins found in the Canadian wilderness here are extremely interesting, and why would they be there? So it seems that they really don't know anything about it except that they've got the when completely settled here. But, after you read this preposterous article here, because even though they're baffled and all kind of stuff, they're going to take a few shots at it. So let's hear what they have to say about it in this article here. Okay. And I'm just going to read, I'm not going to make a lot of comments about it. You listen to what it is. And, at this point, you should be able to see what the issues here are, from just simply watching my channel. So some of you are previous subscribers, so I sort of specialize in tearing these articles apart, these tabloid science articles. That's what I'm sort of known for. And, whatever official statements come out from various sources, whether it be, academics in the field or disciplines of, you know, anthropology or archaeology or whatever it is, So let's take a look at this thing and see what they're gonna sort of speculate about here, with their imaginations about what this is all about. So let me get on with it here, and after we'll talk about it a little bit. So, ruins found in Canadian wilderness baffle archaeologists. Why was it carved here? Why this text? There are no answers except for the whens that they got. No matter what, all the other questions are still outstanding. But hey, the uh, the whens they know all about it. Okay, so let's get back to the top here. Okay, it's scrolling now. Okay, good. Aye, aye, aye. Okay, so archaeologists remain baffled by a surprising, seemingly ahistorical find located deep in the Canadian wilderness. But after years of research, analysis, and historical corroboration, an interdisciplinary team has finally made their findings available to the public. Tucked away in a forest approximately 465 miles northwest of Ottawa, a massive slab of bedrock features a hand etched rendition of the full Lord's Prayer. But the religious text isn't inscribed in French or English. It's composed of over 250 symbols from the oldest known runic alphabet. Pay attention to that. It's the oldest known runic alphabet. The perplexing discovery happened completely by chance, according to the CBC. Hidden for centuries, the stone became exposed only after a tree fell near the town of Wawa, not far from Lake Superior. Closer inspection showed that someone had etched 255 ruins into a roughly 4 by 5 foot section of the slab. Additionally, they took time to add a detailed illustration of a boat and additional 16 runic signs and 14 cross X markings, I guess. Okay, so you can tell from this, okay, uh, uh, you know, hidden for centuries. Okay, so It's sort of vague, but century sort of implies less than millennia, right? So it's got to be that. They've already decided, see. They don't know the hows, the whys, the wherefores, but hey, that's all cool. We know when. Photos of the sites who wound up in front of Ryan Primrose, president of the Ontario Centre for Archaeological Education, who was immediately stunned by the images. It's certainly among the least expected discoveries of my career. It's absolutely fascinating, he told CBC. Okay, so here's a picture of it, this slab and the ruins here. You can see it looks like it's on the side of a mountain over here, somewhere in the Canadian wilderness. All right, and they're busy analyzing it, I guess. Okay. Futhark ruins. However, Primrose didn't want anybody jumping to conclusions about the intrusion. Okay, so don't get too excited now. While it's true that the Vikings explored portions of present day Canada thousands of years ago, he doubted they were responsible for the mystery message. We didn't want to release anything publicly until we had done as much analysis as possible, said Primrose. He soon contacted Uppsala University emeritus professor of runology Henrik Williams and helped the renowned expert arrange a visit to the site the following October. I was under a tarpaulin for 3 hours with a flashlight looking at the ruins, and the others were sitting outside freezing, recalls Williams. The group's patience and endurance paid off. Williams eventually determined that the message was written with Futhark alphabetic ruins, first developed and used by Germanic peoples between the 2nd and 8th centuries CE. Futhark eventually evolved into a simplified version adopted by Scandinavians. Both the Anglo Saxons and the Frisiacs, okay, the Frisians, okay, North Germany and North Holland, the extra large people, also expanded it into their own variants, but the knowledge of how to read its original iteration died out by the High Middle Ages, around 1000 to 1300 CE. It wouldn't be until 1865 that Norwegian scholar Sophus Bugg finally succeeded in deciphering the long lost language. People across Europe remained fascinated with ruins in the interim. However, during the early 1600s, Swedish polymath and occultist Johannes Burius adopted the symbols into a system that roughly corresponded to his home country's language. This culminated in the publication of a Swedish language Lord's Prayer written with the Futhark ruins in 1611. But don't think the Canadian oddity stories ends there. That's right, don't get too excited either, because you're going to calm you down. A more recent inscription. This must have been a Swede, Primrose said of the etcher. Were there any Swedes at all here? Not during the 17th century, according to his research. That said, historical documents confirm that Hudson's Bay Company stationed Swedish workers at trading posts across Canada beginning in the 1800s. And it just so happens that Burius' runic Lord's Prayer was republished during the 19th century. Taken all together, Primrose and colleagues now theorize that a Hudson's Bay Company employee or employees are responsible for the labor intensive project that likely took days, if not weeks, to complete. The conservationists are now working with the local landowners on a leasehold to turn their archaeological discovery into a public heritage site that includes a protective structure to guard it against the elements. Primrose confessed to being a little disappointed that the artifact is likely only a couple of centuries old, but plenty of questions still surround the find. See, it's already settled. It's not that old. Was the site a place for religious gatherings or the devotional effort of one person? Prior to its exposure, the bedrock also lay under multiple inches of soil, with no other artifacts found nearby. Was the prayer intentionally buried? Hmm. The mystery doesn't fade just because it's younger than we hoped. Why was it carved here? Why this text? There are no answers, he said. And mysteries always draw people in, especially if you keep them going with a bunch of nonsense here. So, anyway, that's the whole article there for you. So, what do you think of the article? I think it's preposterous, and for a couple of different reasons. Okay, so let's take a look at it here. So, there's in their minds, despite the fact that they don't know anything about it, just that they found it somewhere in a remote place in Canada here. And, why would that be, of course? But they don't know anything about it, but they know the Wens because Swedes were there. Okay, you get that, right? Because the Hudson's Bay Company had put some there in the early 1800s. So, naturally they would bring with them this fellow this polymath, this guy from the 1600s who decided to sort of make it into fit his own language, okay, Swedish, I guess, right? So, it's not exactly the same thing as these Futhark alphabetic ruins, okay? Because nobody understood what they meant until 1865. That's way after the early 1800s. With, by the way, if anybody was up there doing anything in there, I feel sorry for them. Even the native peoples were suffering up there because early in the 1800s was the coolest decade in 500 years. For the first 10 years of the 1800s was considered the coolest decade in 500 years. So there's a little problem with crop growing, et cetera, up there in that decade. And then in the 1816 came the year without a summer, where temperatures didn't get over like 50 degrees all summer long. So there was no crops that year, and people were starving to death in North America and in Europe as well when that went on. So whatever Swedes were up there, and by the way, these Swedes would have had been heavily obsessed with this food stuff, okay, but this fellow that made this sort of phonetic version of it, this Johannes Burius or whatever. So whatever it said in the Lord's Prayer, if it's Runic, actually, it's not gonna if it's Futhark, right? So then it's not gonna make any sense, right? Because it's the guy fitted to his own language. So in Futhark, if it was being read that way, it's not going to make any sense. It would have to be read in the way, if this is what they're implying, if the Swedes knew about it and they were obsessed with these ruins in the Lord's Prayer from this Swedish polymath during the early 1600s who published it. Um, I find that very incredulous. I'm sorry. I find this whole premise to be hard to believe. If whoever these Swedes were that educated, whatever. What are they doing in the remote wilderness there with all the grizzly bears and wolves and, bobcats and mountain lions and moose and elk and all kind of stuff like that around there? All dangerous animals to be around. Okay. Carving these runes up there and whatnot. And, okay, so there's 255 symbols there and a couple of extras. What are a couple of extras about? And what's the boat about? if it's the Lord's Prayer? What's the boat signifying? All right, so this whole premise sounds ridiculous to me. Okay, just because there might have been Swedes stationed by Hudson's Bay somewhere who went up into this remote area and just to carve this up there, okay, seems rather incredulous to me. Okay, and okay, so hmm, somebody buried it. That's okay. So it's like okay, so it's like hey, it's another go Gobekli Tepe with no other artifacts nearby. Was the prayer intentionally buried? Yeah, was it buried? Well, maybe we could have Klaus Schmidt take a look at it for us. What do you think, guys? Klaus Schmidt. Oh, Klaus. Hi. I'm one of the geologists assigned by university to determine the geology of this site. And oh, by the way, Klaus, nobody buried Gobekli Tepe. Oh, really? Nobody buried? No, nobody buried it. What happened? It was slope slides. Slope slides. That's what we say. We're the geologists here, and I hate to tell you this, nobody buried Gobekli Tepe, but it was due to slope slides. Okay, there, Klaus. You thought it was buried, and as far as everybody in the world right now thinks, except anybody who's bothered to follow up on this seriously, okay, like me, for example. All right, nobody buried Gobekli Tepe. It was the slope slides that did it and everything. Okay, so once again here, somebody buried it. Like Gobekli Tepe there, but so get Klaus Schmidt over there. He'll figure it all out for you because he's a pro. He's ahead of his field there. All right. Oops. Oopsie. Hmm. Nobody buried it. All right. So the mystery doesn't fade and all kind of stuff because they got all these other mysteries. But hey, the when is all determined for them. Okay. So let me see. Okay, so the Vikings couldn't have been in Lake Superior or anything like that. That's way too far down into Canada and everything. And other people have proposed this for other goings on. From other archaeological findings in North America and the United States territory and elsewhere. That implied and insinuated that somehow the Vikings got in there and all kind of stuff. Okay, so then you have the alternative people who are like, yeah, the Vikings came there to settle and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. All right, well, maybe, but I mean, I don't doubt that the Vikings could get into the Great Lakes area because they were experts, okay? So that's, let's think about it a little bit. Okay, so now that we know that from, okay, the Smithsonian here, that cavemen came to the Americas 15 or even up to 20,000 years ago by boat. Okay, so cavemen came by boat. Okay, and here's the article from Smithsonian Magazine from 2019 to let us all know that our our history lessons that we had about the Bering Land crossing there is only minorly true because of this. Okay, so I went over this on my other channel before about this article about how all this stuff had changed and how Alice Shurdless is involved and all kind of stuff like that. Okay, so it says here, in recent years, however, that version of events has taken a beating out of one that we know. from our lessons in school, not least because the discovery of archaeological sites in North and South America showing that humans had been on the continent 1,000 or even 2,000 years before the supposed first migration. A subsequent theory known as the Kelp Highway came closer to the mark. As the massive ice sheet covering West North America retreated, the first humans arrived on the continent not only by foot, but by boat, traveling down the Pacific shore and subsisting on abundant coastal resources. Supporting that idea are archaeological sites along the west coast of North America that date back to 14,000 to 15,000 years. But not only that, but now our understanding of when people reached the Americas and where they came from is expanding dramatically. The emerging picture suggests that humans may have arrived in North America at least 20,000 years ago. Some 5,000 years earlier than has been commonly believed. And new research raises the possibility of an intermediate settlement of hundreds or thousands of people who spread out over the wild lands stretching between North America and Asia. Okay, so look, they're talking about Beringia and all kind of stuff when the water levels were much lower, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then, I've gone over this on my channel, my previous video to this one here about Gail High Pine, a native person who believes, first indigenous person believes that their people come from here. There were people already here before these people from Asia got here. Okay, because things about the native peoples don't make any sense. If you cross as many Siberians with Asian peoples, you still don't get what Native American people are. So where'd that all come from? Okay, so in any case, if you first believe that this crossing happened, and this was Alice Hurdlisch's theory. He believed that the people crossed some 4,000 years ago. That was what was first believed. Then that got extended back to like 7,000 years, and then it got extended back again to 11,000 years, and that was what was taught for such a long period of time. Now it's going back 20,000 years, and in Charles C. Mann's book, okay, 1491, some archaeologists believe that it goes even further back, maybe as far back as 30,000 years. So if you going further and further back with all new data collected, historical data collected from archaeological digs, etc., okay, there's no reason why it can't go back further. You believed it only went back so far, right? Based on what Alice Hurdlisch said, and then was refined later by other academics, etc., etc. Okay, so do we really know the story of the Americas that C.W. Saran tried to warn us about? That the archaeology and Alice Hurdlisch was setting back archaeology 40 years. Okay, this is the guy who wrote the first book on archaeology. Okay, he popularized archaeology, was successful in making archaeology accessible and engaging to a broad audience, presenting it as a blend of adventure, history, and academic study. The first guy to even say anything about archaeology and write it down in the book. That's what he's famous for. They give a prize for it. Okay. So in any case, and this guy, okay, worked for the Nazi Ministry of Propaganda during World War II. The propaganda Trump, okay, produce works there because that's, we're going to say no to the Nazis. Okay, he didn't like the Nazis. He talks about it, okay, and he didn't like Alice Hurdlisch. And when you hear about C.W. Saran's hero being Cabeza de Vaca, who's like the anti-hero of the conquistadors, because he went back to Spain and ratted on him and all kind of stuff. That was Saram's hero. Okay, so you know where this guy's sentiments lie. When when Cabeza de Vaca found out that the conquistadors had been killing all these people and bashing babies' heads out on boulders and stuff like that, he went back to Spain and ratted people out. This was Saram's hero, okay? So, not much of a Nazi there or whatever, but what are you going to do? Say no? All right, so he came to America afterwards because he was interested in American archaeology. And once he found out about it, about how it was being suppressed by people like Alice Hurdlischka, the lunatic, right? The cuckoo bird, right? Alice Herdlischka, cuckoo bird. Sorry, the internet is slow. Should have had the cuckoo bird sound effect waiting for you. Because that's what he was. This was the guy who came up with this baloney, bogus theory about the Bering Strait, the Bering land crossing. Yes, Alice Herdlischka, cuckoo bird. What all these people learn when they become, you know, graduate students in archaeology and anthropology is based on his teachings. Okay, the cuckoo bird. Okay, so, but it's all off because of this. All right, they all came out by boat. Okay, so the cavemen came by boat. This is before the flood, right? Before whatever catastrophe happened 11 and 12,000 years ago. This is before that, right? That they came by boat, right? And of course, the Canadians must know about uh, Captain William Bligh, right? You know, part of their history through Britain, right? Captain William Bligh's most remarkable journey was his 3,618 nautical mile, 4,000-mile open boat voyage after the mutiny on the Bounty. Cast adrift with 18 loyal crew members in a 23-foot launch, Bligh navigated them to safety to Timor, Indonesia after 41 days, which they only had a week of provisions, by the way. Okay, the boat was so low in the water, it'd be like one tip on one side just be capsized in a second with so many guys aboard. Okay, so he navigated. So cavemen came and Captain Bligh navigated his 23-foot boat there in open water through open ocean, all kind of stuff like that. But nope, not the Vikings. They can't make it there. They're not. They're not going to make it all the way there into the Great Lakes. There, no, no, no. Mm-mm. It's got to be some Swedes from the Hudson's Bay Company there. Just happen to go up into the hills there, and everything's cool because hey, they got these runes up there in the Lord's Prayer based on that guy who made it into to fit his language there. I guess the Swedish language there. He made it to fit, and but it's not the Futhark, original early runic scripture there. I can't get this back in again, but it's all right. We don't need it anymore. All right. So, but nobody deciphered the Futhark ruins until 1865. But early 1800 Swedes were up there in the remote wilderness in Canada there. Um, you know, carving it into rocks with extra symbols in there that don't make any sense, along with the Lord's Prayer there. You believe that, right? Okay. You believe that. Okay. So, hmm. Were the Vikings, do we really, when they talk about the Vikings and all kind of stuff, our image of them and everything, is really correct image of the Vikings, really? Okay. That they were just these, berserkers and raiders and all kind of stuff like that for like no reason other than plundering and all kind of stuff like that. But it's funny when you look at this Viking fortress, quote unquote. Okay, when you look at this Viking fortress over here, which doesn't look like much of a fortress to me, judging by the way it's built there. Okay, but it reminds me so much of other things. Okay, even if it is Viking, maybe the Vikings sort of took it over here to doing some archaeological diggings over here inside this circle here that they say is a fort. But it's funny, this article here says that after they're looking at it for a while, okay, says, But recent rescue excavations, aerial photography, and geophysical survey have remedied the situation dramatically, leading to a research project focusing on Viking Age merchant sites in the vicinity of